Check your watches. Time, as always, for the press preview. Our first look at the front pages as they arrive in our inbox. Over the remainder of the hour, we'll be taking a look at what's making the headlines with Polly McKenzie, director of the Demos think tank, and PR consultant Alex Deane. But first, let's run you through the front pages that we have thus far. Starting with the Daily Mail, it reports that Princess Diana's brother, Al Spencer, has written to the Met to ask they investigate the BBC over her interview with Martin Bashir. A new board could be set up to oversee the organisation's editorial output in the wake of the scandal, according to The Telegraph. Well, with The Guardian talking to a former chair of the BBC Trust who warns against a feeding frenzy over the Diana report. Never again, BBC warned after scandal. That's the Yorkshire Post's look at the Prime Minister's message to the broadcaster. We've got The Telegraph there. Their headline, BBC faces shake-up in wake of the Bashir row. I think we did that one once before. Prince Harry opens up about his mental health in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, again, on the front page of The Times. Oh, brother, more on that princely rift in The Sun. Now, while The Express says Prince Harry is hurting the royal family to the core. Interesting take. That's a reaction to his latest TV appearance in a new series about mental health. Boom. The Star has a similar take, I think. Families returning from holidays in amber-less countries may not be fined if children miss school due to quarantine, according to the Eye. In the FT, the chief executive of AstraZeneca has defended the company's COVID-19 vaccine for the first time since the emergence of rare fatal side effects, calling its critics armchair generals. Interesting, that one. Tonight, as you can see, we are joined by Polly McKenzie and Alex Deane. Lovely to see you both. It has been a while. So let's dive straight on into it. And Polly, let's turn to you first, because Alex was so rude to me on social media earlier this evening. Starting with the Daily Telegraph, and of course, people are looking to continue this story. They are looking for ways in which to develop the story. They're choosing to do so by talking about potential changes to the governance of the BBC. But by any token, the response from the BBC needs to be robust to Dyson, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, you know, the details which are now clear, though they've been discussed and rumoured for a very long time, about the way Martin Bashir secured that interview and built the confidence of Diana in him by undermining her confidence in the people around her. It clearly completely unacceptable, the worst kind of journalism, and absolutely must not happen again at the BBC or elsewhere. What I fear, though, is that whilst these events were very serious, and there was, for a kind of sustained period afterwards, a sort of a cover-up and a wish to sort of not talk about it, not admit any faults, for me, it feels really quite irrelevant to, and I'm sure Alex is going to disagree with me, but pretty irrelevant to this wider question of what is the role of our national broadcaster. You know, we're talking about something that happened in 1995. You know, Alex and I were still at school, as I think you, Neil.
Yes, I certainly was. Thanks very much. Cheers, yeah.
The BBC's behaviour then, it could be an indication that the BBC is dreadful now. It could be an indication that the BBC is brilliant now. It has almost no relation to an entirely important and legitimate question about how...
I suppose, Polly, the point that people will mention, Polly, the point that people will mention is that Martin Bashir was rehired by the organisation in 2016. Alex?
Well, that's right. Polly's given the case for the defence, which the BBC is offering. Long time ago, different BBC now, lessons have been learned. How many times have we heard that? But I think you can draw a clear line, there's a clear pattern from this behaviour and the cover-up at the BBC about it 25 years ago, to Stuart Hall's sexual abuse and the cover-up of that at the BBC, to Jimmy Savile's sexual abuse and the cover-up of that at the BBC, to Rolf Harris's sexual abuse and the cover-up of that to the BBC, to re-employing Martin Bashir, as you rightly say, this con man, this liar who's been exposed in this report, so much proclaimed it's historic, to the porkies they told about James Dyson, for which they apologised this week. How much more of a clear pattern do you need to have? If this were a tabloid newspaper, it would close. If this were a tabloid newspaper, all the hacked-off lovies would be calling for it to close instead of rallying to the BBC's defence. The hypocrisy when it comes to the BBC is unbelievable.
Polly, I rudely interrupted you, so I'll let you carry on with the Daily Mail and their headline. It's Earl Spencer repeating a call, in fact, that he made yesterday. You know, now police must probe the BBC. Now, I suppose the problem with that is the Met are saying, well, look, we need to we'll look and see if there's any new evidence. Most of the stuff in this report, I've got to say, despite James Harding, former head of news over at the BBC, saying that he didn't know anything about, he didn't know anything about Martin Bashir's activities back in the mid-90s. I knew about it. It doesn't strike me that there perhaps is much in the way of new evidence.
No, I mean, of course, it's right that the Met should look over the report, look over the files, evaluate whether there is any new evidence. But it seems unlikely that there will be a sort of successful police prosecution or proof of criminal activity here. And of course, that whilst I think it's right to say that there is some relationship between this and the tragic events of Diana's death just 2 years later, it's so much bigger than this interview. It's, as you've been saying in your reports, it's the book that she collaborated in. Prince Charles has done a documentary, had done an interview, admitted to adultery. There was an extraordinary press attention. There was the paparazzi who followed her everywhere she went. There's so much that went wrong in the exploitation of a vulnerable young woman whose life was ruined and ultimately destroyed. I think we shouldn't get sucked into saying it was all the BBC. Again, Alex is right that sometimes there can be hypocrisy for people who want us to have a strong national broadcaster defending it, even when it's made horrific mistakes. There's also a lot of hypocrisy on behalf of tabloid newspapers who published and persecuted this woman, now pretending that it's somehow all the BBC's fault.
Well, of course, your parents taught you what two wrongs don't make, and I think that applies here. But of course, normally, and Prince William's just told us that this contributed to the paranoia that dominated the end of his mother's life, normally people leap to the victim's perspective and defence. I mean, bizarrely and uniquely, people leap to defend the perpetrator when it's the BBC. But Neil, to answer your question about new evidence and what could the police inquiry do, I think there are probably at least three things they can look at. The first is Earl Spencer's notes, because I don't think they've actually gone to the police before. The second is the account of the graphic designer who was deceived by Bashir into doing this mock-up, no fault of his, but then he got blackballed from the BBC and never allowed to work for them again, disgraceful in its own right. But the third is that as we're seeing fallout at the BBC and people taking some kind of responsibility and leaving, they may be more willing to give accounts than they were at the time because their job depended on it. So there should be a police investigation. And if you're a defender of the BBC, I would say you would really want them to be investigated by the police to clear the air over it.
Alex,
otherwise, it will never be clear unless it's properly investigated.
We can accept your position, but and Polly's at the same time, to an extent, can't we? It may well be true that the BBC certainly has a lot to answer in all of this. Now, let's look at the front page of The Guardian. Fears of a BBC feeding frenzy over the Diana report. There are those that are out there to get the BBC that will use this as a lever to do so. To be perfectly honest, the BBC has spent more time beating themselves up over this story than any other broadcast channel that I can mention, probably to their credit.
Neil, the point I was seeking to make is that it's in the BBC's own best interest if they want to. I mean, I think they shouldn't have their charter renewed, and I thought that before any of this emerged anyway. So they will say, oh, well, you're against the institution, your view doesn't count. But one's still entitled to express dismay at a national broadcaster behaving in this way and think it reinforces the case for them not to have their charter. But even if you're a BBC defender, this is my point, Neil, unless they clear this up and unless they answer these questions, the big issue for me will be the question of if they will fit up the security services and those around our future head of state with faked documents and then cover that up for 25 years, who won't they fit up?
Polly, I just want to bring in the front of the Saturday edition of The Times, and it's the picture of Harry in the interview with Oprah Winfrey. My pain over Diana, the headline there. I mean, we've just been talking, Alex has just been talking about the fact, we're talking about very significant figures in public life, but we're also talking about two young boys that lost their mother at a really early age. And, I think I'm probably as guilty as anyone else of forgetting that they have had a lifetime practically a lifetime without their mother, reading all of these news reports, reading those books, watching those interviews. And I think perhaps it's understandable that they want to hit back.
I think it is understandable, and I thought Prince William and Prince Harry both gave moving and compelling statements about the Bashir interview. And it's important that, they, who are also the victims of this awful tragedy that basically lasted the whole of their mother's adult life, are heard and understood. I think the wider exploration of Harry, of his personal and private grief, and private anger at his father in public, I think at some point he will come to regret. I think it is immensely sad that somebody who basically has argued compellingly that being a member of the royal family is too much. It asks too much of a flesh and blood human to be just a cipher for the nation, that you are asked to ignore and suppress your humanity, and to then inflict more of that pain on that father who has to suppress his humanity to stand up for something for the nation, seems to me unkind and an act of anger, not of moving on in the way that perhaps his therapist might advise. And also for he and Meghan, who experienced her father talking about private matters in public, and they felt the grief of that. That there are some things that just are tragic and need to be dealt with, but dealing with them publicly, I don't think helps. I think it's just immensely, immensely sad that he's doing this to his father, but also to himself.
Still, Alex, and your answer will take us to the break. I mean, Prince Harry, the Meghan situation. I mean, what did everyone think his thoughts would first go to? The first time he picked up a newspaper and saw a story that either was or he felt was unfairly critical of his then partner?
Yes, I understand, but I think that where Polly and I agree is that Prince Harry is lashing out and he's very angry. And we've all been in family situations where we've felt that sort of anger and said things we regret. It's just a matter of sadness, I think, that in his circumstances, it gets played out across world media. And that's especially poignant when he, of all people, has been calling for more private life protection rather than this kind of exposure, which he's now willing upon himself.
We will pause there briefly and join you after the break when we'll be discussing why half-term holidays could be just a little happier for parents, according to Di. That's next.
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back to the press preview. Polly McKenzie, Alex Deane, still with us, and a story that I think will bring a certain amount of cheer to a few parents, myself included. Polly, what's the story on the front of the eye? Parents set to escape fines for half-term holidays.
Well, there are now a few countries that you can go to. They will let us in over the half-term holiday coming up in a week or so. But you will have to quarantine on the way back. So basically what head teachers are saying, according to the Eye, is that if you are quarantined, self-isolating after a foreign holiday, if you can book one, they won't fine you for not being able to send your kids back to school for that week or 10 days period after the holiday, which makes me regret the fact that I have booked a camping holiday in England, but never mind.
So I mistook this story slightly. I thought this was if you perhaps took a couple of extra days, took your child out of school for a couple of days before the beginning of the half term, which I'm looking at doing myself for a trip to Scotland, not quarantine. I have to admit, I'm rather surprised by that. You surprised, Alex?
I'm not surprised. I think it's actually a sensible position, and I'd like to see a bit more of this pragmatism from government, which of course has done the right things in the vaccine programme, world leading, and the right things in protecting us as a country. But we accepted all the restrictions that we have in order to prevent hospitals being overwhelmed. And we should be frank about the fact that's simply not a current risk anymore. Coronavirus is now the 9th most common cause of death in the UK. It's 2% of all deaths. That's not just behind things like heart disease, it's behind the flu. And the case rate nationally is stable and declining a bit. And of course, hospitalizations are still falling. So in my view, we should be pragmatic and we should not just stick to the 21st of June unlocking. We should be bringing things forward and freeing ourselves up sooner. We have endured great things during lockdown. It's been for a great cause, but there's been a cost as well as a benefit, and it's time we became free. The sooner the better. All
this talk about holidays, and I just got a vision of Alex Deane in Speedos. Dear God. Right, guys,
Lucky
we will pause there.